So, without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to our guest speaker today, Isabelle, for her own introduction, and then for us all to hopefully learn a little bit more about wine and how AI can be used in this industry.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending. Um, I know we promised no slides, but I couldn't help. So my slides are really mostly pictures just to support my my the conversation that we'll have together. So let me share my screen. And on the tech side, my colleagues at 113, if something falls apart, let me know. So thank you very much, everyone, for participating. The title was Wine and AI. I guess every time we see AI, it's a little bit exciting, but, we talk about the wine industry, and it's really about understanding, this blend between tech and tradition. And I will talk a little bit more about, the challenges that the industry has currently, my interpretation of, some of the root causes, and how I see tech and AI, intervene to help and provide solutions. So that's what I have in store for you. A bit about me. I'm really passionate about wine. My accent is not German, not Swedish, it's French. I know sometimes, people, they know it's European, so that's a good thing. But I was born and raised in France. Doesn't give me any credential, about wine, beside that I grew up in the culture of wine. And I'm very passionate about sensory education and sensory and consumer research. As a sensory scientist, yes, I have 30 years or so. I started very young. Experience in that field, working in academia and the beverage industry, alcoholic and non-alcoholic. I'm a Gallo and Coca-Cola alumni. And if you are not familiar with what sensory scientists do, we are usually part of the research and development function, and our role is really to collect robust data about product perceptions to inform the developers, the winemakers, so that they can create products that really delight the consumers. That's really the goal. And currently, with my education and consulting company, InnoVinum, I help the industry and the educators to rethink the role of sensory science in education and wine business. And I will put a little bit of this wisdom into the presentation. And again, your comments are welcome. And as questions go along, I will be happy to address them. So the key points I want to share today is talking about tradition and innovation. They don't oppose each other. They can blend very well with each other. There is also the other point I want to talk about is the conflicting relationship that the industry has with their consumers, and I will elaborate about that. To finally end, about wine tech, sensory consumer science, how all these different elements can leverage each other to better understand the consumers and drive loyalty and drive sales. And of course, seems like I don't know how to count, but the fourth point would be our friends from 113 Industry demonstrated their latest tools, which I'm very excited about. So tradition, making wine has been a tradition for thousands and thousands of years, dates back to, I think 8,000 of years. I think it's the dates that comes to mind, where some, vineyards and artifacts were found in Georgia, and there are also some older evidence in China that people were growing grapes and transforming those grapes into a beverage. And when you visit wineries, usually you are welcomed with artifacts and, signals that they have been in business for a long time, or their regions have been in business for a long time. This is a photo I took in South Africa where, I entered the cellar and you have all these old barrels and old equipments, to remind you that, there is tradition behind the beverage. The nectar of God, I think Razi mentioned earlier, that they are producing, as well as in Champagne, where I'm from, Dom Perignon is our hero, he created Champagne. We won't debate with people from Britain, but yes, that's what we believe. And despite this, this tradition, when you are welcome in a winery, I would say that the industry on the technical side really has embraced technology in many aspects of growing grapes and making wine. For example, when I was at Brock University in Canada, researchers were working on biosensing, technologies to manage irrigation or nutrient management to save resource, to really do precise agriculture or viticulture. So they were, leveraging, all this technology. And in winemaking, a lot of progresses have been made around fermentation, monitoring fermentation by engineering yeast, not GMO, but, selecting yeast to produce certain types of flavors to resist certain types of conditions. So innovation exists. Technologies have been part of the wine industry for a long time. We've seen new corks, new packaging, and new equipments leveraging lots of automations in the industry. However, whenever people from the industry communicate about wine, there is still this tradition coming in front of us, the history. When you visit a cellar in Champagne, they will take you through the whole process, and then you arrive in front of these boards where the bottles are stored to riddle them, and they will tell you that they keep doing that for every bottles, most of them. But in fact, for the mass market, they will use these machines to accelerate the process of riddling, which is in the second, if you're interested, in the second fermentation, we riddle the bottles to get the yeast involved in the second fermentation, producing the bubbles, the famous bubbles of champagne, to get them, at the bottom of the bottleneck and expel them so that the wine can be commercialized and be appreciated. So the communication, really reinforced tradition, reinforced the romance of, being in a vineyard and making wine. And this is really around, this dichotomy between the technical part of the industry, which really embrace innovation, and the communication part and the hospitality that really wants to keep the tradition and the rituals really ingrained in the way they do their job. And the place of tradition is particularly ingrained in the rituals that were created around wine tasting. Wine tasting, oh, I saw a hand. No, wine tasting is really the reserved domain of wine experts. And, it's understandable because, like many agricultural products back in the time, you needed to have people specialized in products to evaluate the quality of the product, and expertise was built along many years of experience around the products to really understand what was a good product, what was a faulty product, and then develop ways of tasting. And those rituals and the image of the expert taster is still very important in the industry today. And those tasting techniques are taught to the future winemakers because they're really focused on quality assessment and identifying faults, not so much about describing the products in a way that it will be consumer friendly. And that's one of the challenges that I see with those techniques. In North America, the viticulturists and the enologists are trained within the college system or the university system. In France, students have to pass an exam to be officially acknowledged as enologists. But on the marketing and hospitality side, the way people are trained about using tasting and communicating about wine still relies on this same technical assessment, the quality assessment of wine, which is really focused on quality evaluation. It's still a tradition, and it's still very ingrained in the way the wine businesses are doing. If I can reflect back when I started working in the wine industry 30 years ago, when I joined 𝗀𝗲𝗄, I was hired to build the sensory science department in the R&D function. Then the one day I was invited for lunch by the chairman of the company, Ernest Jr. Gallo. And it was, imagine walking into a dining room, all the executives were there, and the young and a bit intimidated French lady was coming in, and we were starting to have the first course. And suddenly Mr. Gallo stopped and looked at me and said, "So, young lady, you are going to teach my winemakers how to make wine." And this is the whole prejudice about, sensory scientists and, the working with experts. It's the impression that, we are somehow taking their job or telling them what to do, which is not the function of sensory. The function of sensory is to collect robust data to inform decisions. We are not making wine. We are not making yogurt. We are informing the development of those products. Anyway, just this story to tell you that 30 years later, many wine businesses still think the same way, and experts are the superhero, and sensory is more research tool than a business tool. But we will try to demonstrate or to challenge that thought later on. So let's look at the relationship with the consumers. We have the experts in one side, the communication about tradition. Interestingly, when I moved to the US, I was really surprised to discover that many people, interested in wine really believed that they needed to become a sommelier, a wine connoisseur, to really appreciate wine. And of course, I grew up in a different culture, and I didn't realize that, I was ingrained in that wine culture, wine and food culture. So, we learned without needed to go to school. We learned about wine and food and wine pairing and, the different regions, etc., because it was part of our environment. But in the US, it was different at the time, and it still, exists, that people really believe they have to take classes, certification programs in order to deepen their appreciation of wines. And those programs are really focused on the same techniques that are taught to future winemakers, looking at quality and describing the wine the way an expert will do. And that's part of what I do with my programs at InnoVinum Academy, is to teach people to really experience the wine through their senses so they can appreciate the wine without taking all these courses. On the contrary, it helps them to develop their awareness, understand what they like and don't like, and learn about the wine if they wish to do so. So really the assumption is that you have to be a connoisseur. And this assumption has really, been built by the wine industry over the years, that you have to become a pseudo sommelier to know how to taste wine, because they really wanted to push the fine wine market. They have, if I, was taking $1 every time I heard that, I would be rich. We have to educate the consumers so they can appreciate our wine. And you would go to a winery. I don't know if you had this experience. So you go to the winery, the host will, behind the bar will, host you, very kindly usually, but they will, set you up for tasting, give you tasting sheets, and, it's very formal. You have the placemat and the glasses, and they, look all fancy, and you're not sure how to host your glass, so you're looking around to see, to check, how other people are doing. And then, most often they will download to you the technical sheet of the products, and maybe all you want to know is, do I like this wine? Do I want to buy it? You don't always need the background information. And I think that's, all these rituals that are built around wine tasting and how we are treating our consumers explain a lot of, the current situation that challenge the wine industry currently. And, I understand, also why the consumers we consumers feel that we need to be educated about wine. Because if you have shopped for wine recently, depending if you can buy wine in the supermarket or you have to go to a liquor store, it's quite confusing. You know, there are lots of brands. The categories are, you know, it's not like you have, you know, non-fat milk, you know, medium fat and whole fat. You have regions, you have varietals, the price points are all over the place. And from the label, it's very difficult, you know, if you know nothing, to select, you know, the wine. You know, my husband is not a wine professional, and he will shop on labels. It doesn't have to be, you know, colorful. It could be a colorful label. It could be a very traditional label. You know, he would shop on that. And conversely, what I would do is I would set, you know, a price point and say, well, you know, this is my limit. And I'm going around and try to find, you know, a wine style that I think I will like. And that's the problem. We cannot taste the wine before purchasing it in a store. And all these cues that I mentioned are used by people to select wine. And it can be a deterrent for the consumers if they don't want to spend time, you know, learning about wine and what to choose, and, you know, what you know, barrel fermented means, and, you know, what a reserve wine is, etc. So I think that's one challenge that we have in our industry right now is we make it complicated, we make it confusing. And that's probably why in the early 2000s, you know, Yellowtail became so popular with people who didn't want to spend time in the textbooks, because they say, well, you know, we take wine seriously, you don't have to, you know, we make wine for you. And it really created a blue ocean of opportunities for this company. They made wine that was approachable and understandable for those consumers. So we have this conflicting relationship with consumers. We want them to be sommeliers, but we create a very complex system. So we need to make, you know, to understand, you know, which consumers really want to have this education and which consumers just want to have, you know, a good beverage for a particular occasion, for a particular purpose. And that's why, you know, the industry is worried. I've been to 2 conferences in January, and the atmosphere was very, you know, heavy, because, you know, the world wine consumption is falling after the peak, you know, of 2020, 2021, you know, post-pandemic. We were drinking a lot of wine and doing tastings, you know, at home. The consumption is falling again, and you know, we've seen vines being pulled off the ground, small producers, you know, struggling with their sales, big producers selling their wine businesses. It's really not fun out there. And my interpretation is that the industry hasn't paid enough attention to their consumers, and they have assumed that the younger generation will act like their parents or grandparents, you know, enjoying to learn about wine, taking classes, wine appreciation classes, becoming, you know, sommeliers. But if I may, you know, let's try to think, when we were 21, 25, did we really want to do the same thing as our parents and grandparents? You know, for many consumption, you know, opportunities, I'm not sure. Young people want to experience life, so it's probably normal that they have different behaviors. And oh, sorry, I went too fast. But you see those headlines in the magazine. But there is some optimistic data showing up through consumer research, showing that maybe the young generation, who are experimenting, they are not into wine yet. They have a lot of opportunities or different beverages for their consideration. They might not have the money to buy, you know, wine at the price point that is offered, but the older millennials, you know, might have. So there are some optimism in the industry. but generally that was kind of tense. So I attended this conference, the Direct-to-Consumer Wine Symposium in January, and everybody was talking about we have to, convert Gen Z and the young millennials. This is a problem of generation. And this young lady, Susan, stood up and said, well, it's not a generation problem, it's a technology problem. The industry is very innovative, but it fails in their communication and interaction with their consumers. And a tech problem, it's the way they interact with the consumers. So here we go with the tech. And I would say back 20 years ago, we had the classic tool. We still have the classic tools to understand our consumers better. We knew that consumer taste preferences were segmented. So this is a visual that represent preference mapping that I did when I was at 𝗀𝗲𝗄, where consumers had tasted different Chardonnay wines available on the market, and we were asking them, how much they liked the products, and we were comparing this data with the sensory data we collected with a trained panel on the side. And what we saw is that, the majority of people were, I think it is this one. Yeah, the majority of people were liking, sweet wines, and others were disliking other profiles. So we know that the market is segmented. We know that there are people who like wines that are simpler in their attributes, in their taste profile, and a minority of people really like those very complex woody wines. At the time, it was 2001. But, those data, the proportion might be different in 2025, but the segments, still exist. So we had the tool. We just tried to ignore it and really try to transform those sweet wine lovers into, aficionados, fine wine purchasers. And it's not a generation problem, it's a tech problem. Well, the assumptions that people within a generation behave the same is probably inaccurate. Within each generation, within each product category, there is more than one consumer type. I learned a lot about, we need to understand the consumer, singular. There are consumers, there are consumer segments, consumers' behaviors. And within a generation, within a Gen Z, I've met a lot of Gen Zs who love wine, who are very, fond about wine, but they like to have wine, part of their lifestyles, not, behind a textbook or in a very classroom setting. They just want to enjoy it with, as part of their activities. And not all consumers want to become fine wine experts of wine connoisseurs. There has been a lot of research showing that one of the main differentiators among wine consumers is their level of involvement in the category. Wine is a hedonistic product. It's a product that we purchase and use for pleasure. It's not a commodity. It's not a utilitarian product. So there are different cues that drive the motivation and purchase of hedonistic products. People who are less involved would look for simple quality cues to help them choose wine. My husband will look at the label, sometimes the price. More involved consumers like me will, spend more time researching online, trying to get more knowledge about the wine before making the purchase. And the threshold was the industry really wanted to attract these consumers. And the proportion of involved consumers is very small compared to the mass market. So I'm not an economist, but I assume that's a challenge when you want to grow an industry. So the challenge is really that a traditional industry from the hospitality perspective, lost traction with their consumers. On the technical side, they have improved. The quality of the wines, have tremendously improved. You have a lot of different styles, but it's very confusing for the consumers. So because we can't taste wine before buying it, that's where, tech came to the rescue of the wine consumers. Most consumers don't understand the expert language. When you hear about tannins and how the wine is harmonious, has some minerality, and what else? Can be elegant, whatever it means, doesn't tell people if they will like it or not. Reading tasting notes, reading by the labels is not really informative. And we have done a lot of research showing that by reading the back label, you can't really match the taste of the wine. And I've done that with my clients just for fun. We taste blind, and then we look at the back label and we see, this is not really what we expected, but that's okay. We learn. So really, the tech industry came to the rescue, and it started, with crowdsourcing platform. You have probably heard about 𝗲𝘃𝗏. It's a platform that collects consumers' rating and opinions, 5 stars rating, the Amazon way. And it became very popular because it was a way to have information from other wine consumers. The challenge is, most of the people who would use the app were people interested in wine, the involved wine consumers. They also were using language of experts because that's what they learn at school. And the downside is that you would have like maybe a 4.6 rating and 5 stars, and then the wines are very different. So which one would you choose? So it was a good, opportunity. However, the result is that it's still very confusing for people to choose wine. And then AI came in. I purchased wine on an e-commerce platform. And so recently I logged in and they said, well, because you purchased this, we think that you are going to like these wines. And that's they make this recommendation based probably on description of those wines, the name of the wines, the region. And so I can try to trust them. However, there was an excellent essay by 𝗶𝗴𝗄 recently in February, basically telling us that, well, personalized AI and recommendation engines are basically junk science. And I give you the link to read it, but it's basically the way those algorithms operate. They don't have enough robust data to really make robust recommendation, and it's often a black box. And the way that they recommend, as I said, it's using the language, but there is no real characterization of the wines to really be able to predict that you will like the product. So that's a challenge. So the tech companies also want to help the wine producers to be able to please those consumers they don't know how to talk to. And the big question is, how can we predict market success? One company recently creates a lot of buzz because their name is 𝗃_𝗏. They analyze the chemical profile of the wines. And then based on this information and other data they have collected on sales and maybe consumers, it's not very clear, they make recommendations to winemakers on how to optimize their blend to appeal to consumers. So that's interesting. That's looking at more objective methods, chemical analysis, to help winemakers connect with their market. However, consumers' opinions are really not taken into account. And the risk is always to, if you use the same data bank, is to create a lot of Me Too products and maybe lose on that aspect. But, why not? The other technology that I've seen recently is it's a bit more traditional, but leveraging technology to be able to look at sales data, consumer characterization based on their demographic, psychographic, if we have, to look to look and segment those data to help the wine businesses make decisions about, what type of wine styles to promote in a particular region for that particular wine consumer segment, etc. So it helps to, instead of having, the same marketing or sales strategy for everyone, to have these insights to tailor the activities, the commercial activities, to particular segments or particular location. But again, what is missing in this approach is the feedback loop from the consumers. And I think that's where it will be my last section. That's where sensory and consumer science, I think, can provide additional data. And I'm getting out of breath. I don't know why. It's just almost like a marathon. Give me a sec. I think it's because I'm too excited. So yeah, how can we help bridge this gap and better understand consumers? So if we look at all the factors that, determine our choice when you are shopping, when you are selecting a product, what we call the intrinsic characteristic of the product, it's the sensory perception we have, the chemical analysis of the products, the chemical parameters that we measure in products. It's only a portion of that. There is all the external factors, all the information that people can have a priori or that is written on the package, the social environment, a lot of external factors, a lot of internal factors to the consumers that also are to take into account. And all those cognitive factors about what people know, their attitudes and beliefs, and and their personal identity. And all these complex metrics of factors interact with each other to inform our choice. So predicting behavior just from one element is a bit risky. So it's I think it's a great problem for the brilliant mind of Anupam and Razi to think about a way to massage this data and help us better understand consumer behavior. So if we think about the definition of sensory science provided by the ASTM, it's a scientific discipline, that use human senses to assess consumer product. When we think about how we measure sensory response and leveraging this definition that says, well, it involves evoking, measuring, analyzing, and interpreting reactions to stimuli perceived through the senses. So when we really want to characterize the product, we set up experiments to really only capture the perception from the product. We want to remove all these other factors that may affect people's behavior, people's response. And we collect the response, which is what I call the analytical part of sensory. Could be, a description of the product, a measure of the intensity, or just saying, this product is different from another one. When we work with consumers and want to have their evaluation of a product, we might be less restrictive. We might want to see more information coming into play into their appreciation of the product. We will measure their liking, how these products make them feel, the emotion. We will look at their behavior. We will listen to what they have to say. So all these data are very important in the capture of the sensory information. And that's why I think, all this data collecting in a robust manner will help inform the decision. And I think that, that's not I believe that it's a very important role for sensory to be able to provide this robust data about the product, about the consumers, so that we can inform the technical side and the marketing side of the wine industry. On the technical side, having this data reliable, repeatable, can help connect and correlate with winemaking or viticultural data to really better understand a particular phenomenon. on the marketing side, understanding the drivers of liking, the sensory attributes driving liking of consumers, how the products make them feel, the type of behaviors that they have, the type of language that they use can really inform the marketing strategy of companies. And that's really, the framework that I advocate, because all these over the technology that I mentioned really look only on one aspect of the food choice or wine choice paradigm. So how to capture those consumer data? If we are a small business, we have a small winery, I'm amazed. I visit many wineries, and very rarely am I asked, how was my experience? What did I think about the wine? Was I treated, correctly? What did I think about the whole experience? And, it doesn't need to have a very complicated technology. You can just have a QR code and leading to a quick survey to show the appreciation, or it could be, if you want people to join your mailing list or your wine club, sorry, it can lead to the landing page to opt in. But I've been recently to wineries in Georgia, and nobody asked me anything. It was really transactional. Come in, have a drink, and bye-bye. So collecting data can be as easy as that. If wineries have a wine club, same thing. Ask about the experience. I receive wines from wine clubs I belong to. Nobody asked me anything. Nobody asked me about my experience with the wine. How did I drink the wine? So all this information can be, gamified so that, it really engage people and doesn't sound like another boring survey. I think we can be very creative in that aspect, and collecting, language, observing people, and collecting information. And of course, we have all these public resources, capturing data from consumers, from online reviews and conversation. Especially the younger generations, they love to be online. I'm an old Gen Xer, so I learned. But Gen Z and young millennials, they were born with almost a phone in their hand, so they are online. They share, they take pictures, they take video. So there are lots of information that we can extract from those public information to start understanding consumer behavior, how they talk about product, their language, how they use the product, and what they do because the product is not 100% satisfactory to them. And that's why I love working with the 113 team, because they have those tools. And in previous work experience, I worked with them, and I learned so much about my consumers that I never thought about. And I think that's really an important aspect for maybe larger companies or wine regions who want to better understand how to interact with their consumers. How do they visit their regions? A lot of insights can be derived from those conversations. So in summary of all my presentation today, we need to better understand our consumers. We can't, transform them all in wine connoisseurs. And the young people like wines, but in the different way that maybe wine connoisseurs do like and enjoy wine. So really we need to understand, how people experience the product. So we need to have comprehensive and robust data, look at a response pattern, and to really extract insights that will guide the business, whatever the size of the business. So I will just conclude by putting my slide with how you can contact me, but maybe before that we can give the floor to Sarah and the rest of the team to show us what they have for us. Thank you.